picture this scenario, right? You are setting out to build a self-sustaining six-figure creative business from the ground up.
Right, which is a massive undertaking.
Exactly. And if you close your eyes and visualize the setup required to make that happen, you're probably picturing like a massive mixing board. Soundproof
Well,
walls.
for sure. A leather sofa in the back of the room, neon lights, the whole works.
Yeah, the dream studio. But what if the actual historical foundation of a music empire wasn't any of that? What if it was built with a flimsy $3.50 Radio Shack microphone, a shoestring, a pair of pantyhose, and an empty Pringles can?
It sounds completely absurd on its face. We are so deeply conditioned to expect that professional success requires a pristine, high-budget environment.
Right.
Especially in the entertainment or audio space. We just automatically equate the cost of the tools with the quality of the output.
Well, today we are dismantling that exact assumption. Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking into a really fascinating, comprehensive strategy guide titled Welcome to Your Six-Figure Home Recording Blueprint.
Yeah, and the author goes by Wilbur, or sometimes by his online moniker, DaddyBean32.
Which is a great name, but looking at that title, Home Recording Blueprint, it sounds like we're about to read a highly technical manual, right? Like acoustic treatment and signal flow and all that.
It really does. The title is definitely a bit of a Trojan horse.
Oh.
Because once you get past the introduction, you quickly realize it is a profound manifesto on resourcefulness.
Totally.
It spends far less time on the technical specifications of a microphone and way more time dissecting business mindset. It's about the psychology of breaking bad habits and what it actually takes to achieve absolute independence as a creator.
And that really sets our mission for this deep dive. We are going to extract Wilbur's ultimate blueprint for turning raw, unpolished potential into a self-sustaining creative business.
Right, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers entirely.
Exactly. We're going to look at how to rewrite the internal programming that holds most creators back and how to build a business infrastructure, even if your starting capital is literally just a library card and a cell phone.
And, the author is incredibly adamant that before a creator even touches a single piece of recording equipment, they have to confront the reality of the industry first.
Yeah, the mainstream industry.
Right. Because the mainstream music industry, as most consumers see it anyway, operates largely as an illusion. It's designed to keep the barrier to entry artificially high.
And the source material grounds that claim, in a pretty staggering statistic, Wilbur points out that 89% of people get completely queued up and spit out when they chase that traditional industry model.
89%, that is huge.
It really is. They spend years, sometimes decades, fighting tooth and nail for this microscopic sliver of a $900 billion global entertainment pie.
Because they're basically participating in a lottery system disguised as a career path.
Right.
The author argues that this is fundamentally the wrong software for a creator to be running.
The wrong mental software.
Exactly. The objective shouldn't be to beg a massive conglomerate for a tiny slice of their pie. The goal is to shift your identity to a music CEO. You want to own 100% of your own pie, no matter how small it starts out.
Okay, let's unpack this because I love this idea. Trying to navigate today's digital creator economy with a traditional old-school record deal mindset. It's like trying to run the latest 4K video editing software on a Windows 95 computer.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, it's inevitably going to crash. The hardware of the modern internet and the outdated software of the legacy music business are just completely incompatible.
So you just end up paralyzed waiting for permission from an A&R rep who is frankly never going to call. And the brain is quite literally a biological computer that requires constant software updates. If you aren't aggressively updating your skills and your understanding of the market, you are running outdated programming.
And the foundational update he insists on is this concept he calls leverage.
Right. Leverage is essentially the Archimedes lever that moves the world. And to illustrate this, the source material contrasts two hypothetical people, Tom and Tasha.
Right, let's talk about them.
So Tom is 35 years old. He has spent the last 2 decades smoking, watching television, just hanging out in his mom's basement. And suddenly, he decides he wants to be a doctor.
Which is a nice thought, but...
But Tom represents a life entirely devoid of momentum. He has zero foundational habits that align with that sudden ambition.
Yeah. And contrast that with Tasha. She's 30, and she has spent her entire life singing in church choirs and school ensembles. She has built up years of quiet, steady momentum.
Exactly. She possesses the foundational skills.
But looking at this from a practical standpoint, how does someone actually acquire this leverage? If they look at their life and realize, they're a lot closer to Tom than they are to Tasha. Like, how do you generate leverage from absolute zero?
Well, the author pinpoints the exact moment leverage is created. It starts when you force a transition from an idea to an ideal.
Idea to an ideal.
Yeah. An idea is passive. It's just a daydream you have while waiting in line for coffee. But an ideal, in his framework, requires taking a seat at the table and actively trying to make a deal.
Oh, I see.
He uses the analogy of negotiating at a flea market. You don't gain leverage by just staring at an antique clock from across the aisle. You engage the vendor, you make an offer, you endure that uncomfortable back and forth.
Because action forces a reaction.
Precisely. That friction is where leverage is born. It's the moment you stop wishing and start actually strategizing.
That transition from passive wishing to active negotiation completely reorients your mindset. But, as soon as that mental shift happens, perceived reality hits. You sit down at the metaphorical table, you're ready to work, and the first thought is inevitably, I don't have the gear.
Oh, the pervasive myth of the $10,000 studio. It is the ultimate psychological out for a beginner.
It really is.
Oh, yeah.
But the author's own origin story is a perfect case study in destroying that myth. So he was working in the anesthesiology department at Emory Hospital.
Right.
And one day, he gets fired. But rather than wallowing in that defeat, he's sitting on the train ride home, writing raps in a notebook and making a hard, unshakable vow to become his own boss.
And the determination in that specific moment dictates everything that follows. Because, he didn't have the budget to rent studio time or buy a high-end interface.
No, not at all.
So he engineered that legendary DIY rig you mentioned at the start of the show. He took a floatsy $3.50 microphone.
Which is just crazy.
And he placed it inside an empty Pringles can. That acted as a makeshift acoustic isolation shield to block out room reverb.
Wow.
Then he hung that entire contraption from the ceiling using a shoestring and a thumbtack. And finally, he stretched a leg stalking over the front of the can to act as a pop filter, diffusing the hard consonant sounds from his vocals.
And he actually recorded his early demos on that setup. Like, he was walking into industry parties and passing out cassette tapes with audio recorded through a pantyhose and a potato chip can.
It's incredible.
But he doesn't just treat this as a cute story from his past. He actually advises modern creators to actively avoid high-end setups today. He specifically warns them about what he calls the Pro Tools trap.
Right. Pro Tools being the famously expensive industry standard digital audio workstation. It's used by virtually every major studio in the world.
Yeah, but he breaks down the reality of using that software as a beginner. He cites the agonizing load times, the constant crashing if your computer's RAM isn't powerful enough, the painstaking wait times to bounce a track.
Not to mention the sheer expense of the software and its proprietary plugins.
Exactly. So his advice is to radically downgrade. He tells his readers to go to eBay and buy outdated 20-year-old hardware, like picking up the Digio 2 or Digio 03 racks for $80.
Equipment that used to retail for $1,000.
Or buying a starter bundle from his own eBay store. He even praises underdog brands like Behringer, noting that equipment once dismissed as cheap now totally rivals the top brands in functional output. But let me challenge this for a second.
Okay, what's the concern?
Well, if Pro Tools is the undisputed lingua franca of the major studios, isn't telling a beginner to actively avoid it and buy outdated $80 gear from 2 decades ago, isn't that setting them up for massive compatibility issues later on? Like the second they try to collaborate with a professional.
That is a logical concern, sure, if you are planning to immediately hand your session files over to a major label mixing engineer. But the author's underlying philosophy here is vital. Quality over bells and whistles.
Okay, how so?
Well, what's fascinating here is he's making a profound point about the psychology of the end consumer. Listeners do not care about your process.
That's true.
The audience sitting in their car, they do not care if you used a $10,000 Neve console or an $80 Behringer interface.
They only care about the emotional impact of the audio hitting their ears.
Precisely. The end result is the only metric the market uses to judge you.
Yeah.
Is the song danceable? Are the vocals clean? Does the podcast hold their attention?
Right.
Resourcefulness is the actual skill being taught by downgrading. When you are forced to make a hit record on an $80 interface, you have to master the absolute fundamentals of sound engineering. EQ, compression, leveling.
Because you don't have those expensive automated plugins to mask your mistakes.
Exactly.
So if you strip away the need for a massive equipment budget, You expose the real barrier. It's not money. It's knowing what to actually do with the equipment you have, which introduces his concept of the mobile university.
And this is where the strategy guide expands from just a music manual into a full life philosophy. The author reveals that the most powerful knowledge required to build an empire is entirely free.
As long as you know where to look.
Right. He refers to this as his contra code for business. Referencing that old video game cheat code for extra lives.
Oh yeah, up, up, down, down.
Exactly. He built his entire success bunker using freely available tools. And the catalyst for this was a trip to his local public library.
He checked out a 40-page book on wealth by Dave Ramsey that fundamentally reprogrammed his approach to finance, right?
Yes. He spent hours taking copious notes in the margins of his own notebook. But when he returned the book, someone else immediately checked it out.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he lost access to the source material that was changing his life. But that moment of panic led to a massive revelation.
Because the librarian introduced him to Hoopla Digital.
Right, which is a completely free application tied directly to your library card. It grants instant access to thousands of audiobooks, movies, and educational courses.
It's an amazing resource. And he took that free access and combined it with a concept he learned from Joel Osteen, turning your vehicle into a mobile university.
Yes. So instead of passively listening to top 40 radio during a commute, you actively consume biographies, business courses, and financial strategies. You transform dead time into an intense educational incubator.
He also stresses the importance of organizing all this information. He relies heavily on the free Google Suite. Google Docs to catch random napkin notes, Google Slides to visually organize long-term goals.
And Evernote to serve as a searchable digital brain.
And YouTube, of course, which he rightfully categorizes as the ultimate free college. Reading the section, the psychological mechanism really clicked for me.
How do you mean?
Well, utilizing these free tools isn't just about being organized. It is about offloading cognitive strain. But when you have a creative idea, actively holding onto it in your memory takes immense mental energy. Dumping it into a reliable, free digital system frees your brain up to actually execute the idea.
That makes total sense.
It's just ironic, right? We hold a piece of glass in our pockets that connects to the entirety of human knowledge, yet the default human behavior is to use it to scroll through cat memes.
It's so true.
So with all of these high-powered, free tools like Audacity and Hoopla readily available, what is the actual differentiator between a lifelong hobbyist and a working professional?
Well, the author answers that with a brilliant analogy involving Cyclops from the X-Men comics.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah. Cyclops possesses immense, devastating power shooting out of his eyes, right? But without his specialized ruby quartz glasses to focus that beam, the power is just useless, destructive chaos.
Right.
In this framework, the free tools, the library apps, the recording software, the YouTube tutorials, that is the raw power. It is abundant and free. But your focus, your strategy, your willingness to sit down and meticulously execute a plan, that is the ruby quartz glasses.
Wow.
Without intense, sustained focus, you are just a person holding a phone full of powerful apps you never actually deploy.
Okay, so you've gathered the focus power, you have the skills. But there is a wall every single creator eventually hits, and it is almost entirely psychological. You have to convince someone else to exchange their money for your creation.
Sales. It is arguably the most feared and misunderstood word in the creative community.
Many people are terrified of it. The moment you say sales, the brain instantly conjures the image of the sleazy, cigar-smoking, used car salesman trying to pressure a vulnerable family.
Yeah, nobody wants to be that guy. But the author completely dismantles that stereotype.
Yeah.
He reframes sales not as a tool of manipulation, but as an act of service.
An act of service, I like that.
True sales is simply the process of connecting people to a solution they already need or desire. And to understand how to sell effectively, you first have to understand the deep psychology of brand loyalty and human habit.
And he provides this incredibly relatable anecdote about his wife and laundry detergent.
Oh, the Folka story.
Yes. So they're walking down the aisle at the grocery store, and he spots this massive, incredibly cheap bag of off-brand detergent called Folka for $3. He is thrilled by the economics of it, more volume for less money.
But his wife completely ignores the logic.
She absolutely refuses to buy the $3 bag. She prefers to pay a significant premium for established brands like Game or Tide.
And we have to look at the mechanism behind her refusal.
Yeah.
She isn't just buying soap, she is buying emotional peace of mind.
Right.
The premium price of Gain or Tide It's basically an insurance policy against ruined clothes and wasted time. Familiarity breeds profound trust. He also notes that his grandmother still calls liquid detergent washing powder, a term held over from a previous generation, purely out of ingrained habit.
Or take the Colgate toothpaste analogy. You don't scientifically evaluate the fluoride content every time you go to the pharmacy. You just grab the red box because decades of repetition and advertising have built a neurological baseline of trust. But here's where it gets really interesting. That makes total sense for a physical product sitting on a shelf. But how does that translate to an intangible creative service? Like, how does a freelance audio engineer or an independent musician manufacture that same deep-seated gain detergent level of loyalty with a fan base or a client?
The author's thesis is that you generate that loyalty through absolute authenticity and relentless consistency. You can't artificially manufacture 3 decades of consumer trust overnight.
No, definitely not.
But you can build a micro version of it by repeatedly showing up, acting professionally, and delivering undeniable value. It's about creating an emotional environment where your client or listener feels entirely safe and understood.
And he doesn't just leave this as an abstract marketing theory either. He assigns the reader a highly practical piece of homework to start building that muscle immediately.
Yes, the Craigslist ad exercise. It is a masterclass in breaking psychological barriers.
So he tasks the reader with creating a brand new, separate, professional Gmail account. The days of using a personal email for business inquiries are over.
All right, step 1 is professionalism.
Then he instructs you to open Google Docs and draft what he calls a response ad. And the key instruction here is tone. It should not read like a formal, stuffy corporate press release. It needs to be casual and conversational, as if you are texting a friend.
Yeah, that's crucial.
You offer a free 30-minute studio session or a quick consultation, but you inject a strict 72-hour urgency limit on the offer. Finally, you post that ad on Craigslist.
And the brilliance of that exercise lies in the specific hurdles it forces you to clear. First, it requires you to practice conversational copywriting.
Which is hard.
It is. Writing an ad that doesn't sound like an ad is a highly lucrative skill that takes immense practice. But more importantly, this 72-hour limit creates a psychological trigger not just for the buyer, but for the creator.
Because the clock is ticking.
Right. The ad is not really about securing a paying client today. It is about breaking the seal of fear. It forces the creator to move from the safety of theoretical learning into the vulnerability of the open marketplace.
Because the second you hit publish on that ad, the second you start treating your art as a public service, the protective bubble bursts. Reality is going to push back.
Inevitably.
You are going to face rejection and setbacks. And that requires a deep understanding of your own backstory and how to fail forward.
How a creator metabolizes those initial setbacks ultimately determines the trajectory of their entire career. The author shares a deeply painful story from his own youth to really illustrate this.
The Scam Guide story.
Yeah. He was a teenager, heavily inspired by the late-night television commercials featuring music moguls like Master P and Puff Daddy. They were selling the dream of independent wealth.
And he managed to scrape together roughly $59 to purchase a music industry strategy guide he saw advertised on TV.
Right. And for a teenager, $59 might as well be $5,000. It is a massive investment.
Oh, absolutely.
So he was waiting by the mailbox, fully expecting a package containing the literal keys to the kingdom. What actually arrived was a phone book. It was nothing but a massive, cheaply printed directory of dead phone numbers and outdated mailing addresses for record labels that no longer existed.
And he sat there and called every single number in that book. None of them connected. He had been completely scammed.
Yeah.
The emotional devastation of that moment could easily convince someone to declare the entire music industry a fraud and just walk away forever.
Most people would.
But instead, he synthesized the pain. He said the experience taught him the absolute value of integrity in business. Because he felt the acute sting of being scammed, he made a foundational vow to never sell people false promises.
And he pairs that with another intense story about his mother. She slipped on the stairs and broke her ankle in their home while he was safely downstairs writing a book.
Right.
He uses his mother's accident as a stark metaphor for entrepreneurship. Even when help is seemingly just one room away, gravity takes its course. No one is going to magically materialize out of thin air to catch you the second you lose your footing.
That's a harsh reality.
It is. The paramedics can arrive to help piece things back together after the fact, but the fall is yours alone. In business, you are the sole hero of your own story, and you have to build the infrastructure to catch yourself.
And he ties this reality into a classic screenwriting framework from Joseph Campbell. The dynamic between the front story and the backstory. The front story is the visible action. It is the hero fighting the villain on screen, the artist performing to a sold-out crowd, the CEO ringing the bell at the stock exchange. It is what the world sees.
The highlight reel.
Exactly. But the backstory consists of the pain, the humiliating failures, the insecurities, and the $59 scams that actually provide the psychological fuel driving the hero forward.
And he reinforces this by referencing the motivational speaker Brian Tracy, who argues that to achieve monumental success, you must be willing to fail 100 times.
Now, I have to pause here and question the practicality of that advice.
Okay, what's the issue?
Well, in an entertainment ecosystem that is built almost entirely on reputation, word of mouth, and public perception, isn't it incredibly dangerous to encourage a beginner to aggressively fail 100 times? Like, couldn't one highly public, catastrophic failure completely ruin a career before the foundation is even poured?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a vital distinction to make. The author is absolutely not advocating for careless public failures that burn professional bridges or damage your reputation.
Okay.
He is talking about the necessity of failing in the lab. Your makeshift home studio, your private practice sessions, your early local gigs playing to empty rooms, your unanswered Craigslist ads. Those are your laboratories.
I see.
Those are the controlled environments where you test theories, you stumble, you encounter technical issues, and you refine your craft away from the unforgiving glare of the mainstream spotlight.
So the pain of those early private failures becomes the necessary fuel for the public front story later on.
Exactly. The scam phone book did not end his career. It became the origin story for his unshakable business integrity. Recording into a Pringles can wasn't a public embarrassment. It was the private birth of a resourcefulness that money cannot buy.
Wow.
You have to actively embrace the scientific process of failing, because every single failure is simply a data point revealing a method that does not work, bringing you one step closer to the method that does.
Well, we have covered incredible ground today. We started with a teenager constructing a makeshift vocal booth out of a potato chip can and a pair of pantyhose.
A true classic.
And we unpacked the psychological mechanisms required to bypass expensive traditional gatekeepers by utilizing free civic tools like library cards, Hoopla Digital, and strategically written Craigslist ads.
Right.
And we uncovered the fundamental shift in identity required to stop fighting for scraps from a conglomerate and instead assume the role of the music CEO of your own life.
The overarching, undeniable message of this blueprint is that the traditional barriers to entry have been completely dismantled. The raw tools required to succeed are literally sitting in your pocket right now.
You do not need a $10,000 acoustically treated studio. You do not need the validation of a mainstream record deal. You just need to leverage the exact resources you have, starting from the exact location you are in today.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought rooted in that screenwriting analogy. As a society, we spend an inordinate amount of time obsessing over our front story.
We really do.
We curate how we look on social media, we polish the successes we project to the world, and we hide our stumbles. But if you are truly going to be the hero of your own story, ask yourself this. What is the unseen backstory of struggle and friction you are currently writing today? And exactly how are you going to use that struggle as your Archimedes lever tomorrow?